Thank you. Thankful for everybody participating today, giving up your valuable time. I do hope this is going to be of use for you. I believe it will. And it's going to be a whirlwind. So we're going to be moving at breakneck speed through a bunch of issues, some in quite some detail, some in slightly lesser detail. But either way, there's going to be a lot of information here that will be shared. So I'm sure there's a recording of this. You can review it afterwards, take furious notes, and I'll do my best to hopefully make this a good use of your hour. Also want to recognize that there is a very wide number of participants today. We've got people from lots of different industries and lots of different focused jobs and functions that you perform. So, this is about technology shaping our future, and at times I will get a little bit more technical and at times less technical. But I've got to try and pitch this somewhere, and I'll do my very best to do so. So let's get going. And I think, when I think about the future, I imagine the future as a series of pulses. Now, the closer to the present that you are, the calmer the pulse, the more tuned you'll be. And the farther out, the more precarious, the more volatile that it becomes. An exercise in understanding the future, or actually an exercise in understanding and future-proofing your business by knowing which signals need to be tuned and when. So one of the images that I like to think about with this and the complexity is sort of that of a sound mixing board. I think it's a useful visual for the complexity of the issues, and especially of sort of this signals to noise ratio, and knowing which button to push or slide in some of this context, but also to what extent. And it needs to be for each and every button because each will have a different action. So what's the outcome based on different shifts and different patterns? So you can imagine, this is an incredibly complicated task, a seriously hard one. So some buttons require visiting daily, some require visiting monthly, some weekly, and so on. So the importance, the cadence is also extremely hard. So today we're going to look at some of the mechanisms involved in this. It's probably more at a panel level than a specific button. We're going to try and touch on a few of the buttons, but each of the variances within those buttons for each of you will be very, very different. So based upon looking at the audience today, we've selected some from our experience, and hopefully some of these will resonate. Certainly, we believe all of them are relevant. So I'm Richard Sear. I'm a managing partner at Advanced SciTech. I'm very blessed to be in this position. I'm surrounded by a wonderful team of scientists and engineers. So we have ethnographers and anthropologists, economists. I'm a boring old economist by trade and a converted technologist, I guess. And our job here is to provide evidence-based research that helps you, our current members, and hopefully potential future members make better and more confident decisions. To do that, it's as much an art as it is a science, but at our hearts, it's science. Science is first for our team in the lens and the aperture that we use. So in other words, it's our grounding force. Very passionate about what we do, but we also know that our job is to hopefully translate some of the provocations that we're going to present today in a clear and meaningful way. So in our work, we very often observe a very defensive posture about technologies for the future. And my gosh, if yesterday was any notice to this, then I think this is proven true. And that's a reference to DeepSeek, which I think is in everybody's LinkedIn fields ad nauseum yesterday. When we look at this, it's really a way of thinking which truly amounts probably to at least half of my experiences from this sort of repeating stage of negativity or skepticism about issues. This is not to suggest a state of perpetual failure, but rather that there is a reason for high failure rates with many launches of new technology. Our point here is that most of us, that it's usually driven by methods of reward, like near-term compensation, are really disproportionately rewarded by our current day activities. So it immediately places us in a defensive posture, one where we're on the back foot. We hear words like, quantum and metaverse and living materials and the like, and we're immediately skeptical. And in part, that's down to things like mainstream media. diluting these terms, Ant-Man and the Wasp, the quantum realm. And we start to become dismissive and think of them as Hollywood or science fiction. And it creates a relative slowness in action that's almost innately baked into us because of that. In short order, though, you very quickly wonder at the end, the chasm of whoops, what in the world? How did we actually, miss that? So counter to that should be the opposite, clearly. And the opposite for us is expressed here in the repeating stages of success. The antidote, if you like, is always a what is that posture, a keep talking posture. And it's very hard to do. This seems obvious because unfortunately our natural state is the last slide. So I guess what this is an expression of me saying to people that it's extremely important how we address technologies and not be dismissive because it might not be something that is relevant to our immediate job. Say, for example, if you're a healthcare professional and somebody starts talking about energy, like I will later. This is all about like sprinting to understand and then taking steps to plan based upon that information. And at that point, you can move into a dance to do, which is essentially an adjusted, embraced act of trying to understand how to use this within your specific functions and roles. So this is more of a posture. This is more of a sort of a thematical belief. Now, I'm extremely lucky. I work for an organization that pays me to do this, and I get to take on that posture, and so does my team. And I spend my time being intentionally future focused. And what this is how I spend my day. I spend a lot of my time with people. I spend a lot of my time in experiences, and I spend a lot of my time, with my team. Experiences are the most important part of it. That's the context by which I can understand how the world would embrace things. What I'm really trying to get at here is that everybody on the phone or on the Zoom today has a role to play in being future ready, being intentional. But in order to do that, you actually do have to be intentional. You actually do have to put time aside. You actually do have to do things like you're doing today and maybe sharing an hour in order to gain maybe a few pieces of knowledge that will help you progress forwards positively in the future. But you can build this into your team meetings. You can build it into your meetings because you know that you probably spend a lot of time in those meetings in a less efficient way. So a very efficient way is, what have we learned that's new today? And it can be anything. And that's essentially the approach that I try to take and my team tries to take in all of the work that we do. And to do that, we use methodologies, one of which is future casting. And when I say intentionally ready, I really truly do mean that you have to have a methodology. You need to have a principle grounding force for how you do these things. Far too many companies espouse beliefs and then say, well, that was the advice of a such and such consulting company or something. And no, the vision has to be yours and you must understand it. And future casting is a way to do that. Now, this isn't just our methodology. This is something about 15 years ago. It was developed by a wonderful guy called Brian David Johnson, who's a good friend of mine, a futurist who was a futurist at Intel, now is a professor at Arizona State. And I worked on this with him. We've known each other for a very long time, and it's a curated process. You can take this. You can snapshot this or wait for the slides and start to build on it and ask me questions about it. But the point is, you need a process. It's not just workshops and having fun thinking about the future. It's a very serious business. Okay, so our team focuses, as you will see today, on 7 core areas. We believe that's very important in the decision landscape to understand how all of these work together. Technologies don't live in a vacuum, nor should we. So, we have to understand how these work so that you can understand how value chains operate. And it's very important for companies, especially today, to understand value chains and how they essentially interact and work with each other. So you have to understand the full tech universe. You can't live in your own little box. So we cover topics at an ingredient level. Like I said, we're scientists. So it's very important for our team to understand the actions that make a product or a solution or a service ultimately come to market. And there's context that has to be provided to do that. The way that we use is we look at 4 different areas: business models, environmental priorities, socioeconomic and geopolitical, and transformative technologies. it's called the BEST framework. Now, that was an accident, I can assure you. But it is critical that technologies do not just operate by themselves and become successful. Not always the best technology wins. So context is extremely important. We'll discuss some of that context as we go through today. Okay, so we're going to now head into talking about some of these forces. I could have picked a lot, but not a lot of time. And I'm a little bit more of a detailed guy, so I prefer to give more detail than less. And I prefer, therefore, to select fewer rather than more. But it still means that I'm going to be talking quite rapidly through a few of these issues today. And they're all intertwined, as this essentially suggests. So we're going to cover the 4 forces today, and we're going to cover them at a relatively breakneck speed, okay? So the very first one that we're going to focus on is going to be new compute. This is a mammoth topic for discussion. I mean, we literally could be spending weeks in this area, not just days. So let's head into it. And this slide is going to be up for quite some time, probably a good 8 to 10 minutes. So you can absorb through as much as you like here, but hopefully we're all just going to focus on some of the things that I'm going to discuss. So let's begin by just saying that I think just about every company that we speak to as a team has questions about our perspective for when AGI, or artificial general intelligence, will become a reality. For us, it's a little bit too simplistic to discuss AGI in the context of both embedded intelligence, which is at parity with the human brain, as well as emotional intelligence, which would be in parity with our actions and our behaviors. Embedded is obviously reasoning and making those connections, and we call this the accomplishment of proto-AGI. Now, our team asserts that this will be meaningfully relevant and at scale by approximately 2030. Now, I know that people put out numbers, but there are reasons why we get to our number, and I'll be explaining that here as we go through the course. Emotional will be later because it's a far more complicated thing to do. So we think that that's more likely in the mid-2030s, but it could happen faster based upon some of the assertions that we're saying. So we're going to talk through some of those assertions, and there's things like reinforcement learning, which we saw through DeepSeek have new and unique and novel ways of approaching it, which has escalated the compute curve. But ultimately, this is the problem that needs to be solved in order for real-time action to be taken in this space. So we get to things like true agency, agentic AI, meaning actual agency, not advanced bots. It's an area that I think we all can probably see is getting a lot of interest. Much of the criticism in the AI field is being unrealized potential with capital outlays exceeding the income that many people are seeing. This is going to continue for quite a few years. And a quick word to the news of yesterday, I've already alluded to it a few times. No, GPU demand is not going to decline. Certainly, there's a lot of information and validation that is needing to be received with regards to what DeepSeek has accomplished, and we have to do that. It's responsible for us to understand exactly how that was done, and not just review technical papers that was by the author themselves of the breakthroughs. So I personally would not advocate for it at this moment, because we do not have the research at hand. However, for the next jump to happen, the next major shift, we have to turn to a different form of compute. And that's where we see the realization of quantum machines. It's a highly discussed and debated topic. Many people have strong opinions on this. And I'm going to try to suggest today some of the more technical reasons why we should be listening a lot closer to quantum machines. Also, it needs some demystifying. GPS, for example, is a quantum technology. And quantum atom clocks have been in operation for a long time. They've been helping us secure our communications and even driving things like high-speed trading. So let's understand that quantum is not a binary switch, a 0 or a 1, that is either here or not here, or we need to see it in the form of a quantum computer in order for us to understand quantum. No, it's been around a long time, and it's evolving extremely rapidly. So I am only going to talk about compute, though, today. There is a lot more to discuss on quantum, but we'll talk about advancements in quantum hardware, especially now, for a few moments. And let's see if some of this maybe resonates. You can't discuss quantum computing. You can't discuss this next shift, which is relevant to everything you see here and everything we're going to talk about later, without understanding superconducting qubits. They are the architecture, the mechanism for compute. And you see large organizations, the IBMs, the Googles of this world, investing very heavily, and they're scaling their systems from tens to hundreds of qubits with roadmaps to 1,000 qubits by the time we reach the late 2020s. I think they'll actually get there a couple of years earlier than that, especially for 1,000 qubits. We're already on a pathway to that. This means very extensive computations, highly varied applications, and we've already been seeing this at early scale. We saw the news of Willow, which happened in December. It was a little bit of a marketing push, but the technical solving was a huge deal. Buried under the marketing, it was a phenomenal capture of what they managed to do. We see that at scaling qubits more effectively with better stability because they're creating more. And it's not the only area. You've got to look at things like trapped ion and photonics, and you see platforms like IonQ, PsiQuantum, which are leveraging these technologies with a higher coherence times, better, more structured modular architectures, and they're creating better scalable systems. And PsiQuantum is a good example of that if you're interested. They were advanced to DARPA's second phase of their utility scale program in October last year, and it's based upon photonic fault tolerance. So this is an extremely important area to understand. Quantum error correction is still at the heart of the viability, though, of quantum computing. And I talked a little bit about that. And you've got fault-tolerant quantum computing and logical qubits that are very, very important. And we're seeing better protocols and things like surface codes that are being implemented. They're helping error suppression. They're helping us get in scale towards more practical systems. Google, as I mentioned, has already done a very good one on error suppression. I think they'll continue to show tremendous growth in this space. And logical qubits are reducing phenomenally. If you base them upon Bacon-Shaw or Steam codes, they're reducing down to 0.1 to 1% error rates. We're starting to hit the threshold limitations where error correction reduces to the degree that qubit production increases exponentially. And if that's the case, we'll hit the 1,000 level far sooner. Now, I mention all of this because its application and relevance to every job, strategy, product development, trading, whether you're an outsourced business provider, whether you're providing localization services, or you're somebody that's involved, perhaps in business services and outsourcing for call centers. Every single job is going to be dramatically transitioned in the next 3 to 4 years, maximum 5. You're too late if you don't understand this. Integration with classical computing systems is already happening. They're a natural bridge between quantum computing and existing infrastructures. We're using algorithms like variational quantum eigensolvers and quantum approximation organization algorithms. Sorry, I should say optimization algorithms that are there specifically to design and help catalyze on the integration of real-world problem solving with quantum machines using classical infrastructure. This is extremely important. You see middleware companies like Zapata and Cambridge Quantum that are using frameworks like Qiskit that are streamlining those applications to solve problems like drug discovery or enable with that, or new and novel solutions for more integrated digital twins in manufacturing environments. It is becoming much more accessible to industries. Okay, so real world problems here are being solved. And in doing so, it's starting to encroach now into areas like human embedded technologies. Naturally, the advancements in quantum is pulling through classical computing, and you're seeing dramatic improvements in today's issues using today's infrastructure. And this pull-through effect is extremely important. It's why it's not a 0 or a 1. It's more of a curve. But the curve has gone from being more of a flatter curve to a far steeper curve, far more than most people expected. So as we see advancements in this space, you're leading to an era where you see transhumanism become a thing, where our bodies are constantly monitored electronically from within, reading biometry within our bodies in real time. I worked on a project not so long ago that was involving the integration of nanotechnology into our arteries in order to perform sensing. They were monitoring, they were cleaning arteries, they were sensing ultimately for cardiovascular incidents that could potentially happen. Now, it's all too obvious to mention, things like Neuralink in the brain, but these are very real advancements. This is pure BCI, but understand that this is not on a pathway for pure BCI. With the improvements that we're already seeing in BCI, we're already now discussing, probably earlier than we thought, real and true direct cognitive communications, where thoughts, emotions, even sensory experiences can be shared real time, redefining things like telepresence, maybe even redefining the hardware space for things that we're doing in the metaverse or virtual reality. There is a huge focus around brain optimization. But let's not put that aside just as it's just about the brain. It's not. Other organ and full body monitoring is taking place. And we'll talk a little bit about it later when we get to the health section and we discuss some other areas. But even using human DNA for storage is now on the table. Not for compute, I should be clear, it's far too slow for compute. The final one on this that I want to touch on is the tremendous growth that we're seeing in space-based opportunities. It is an area where we are getting inundated with requests for discussion. And one area I think just to mention would be on space data centers. I think it's extremely important. They're emerging as a very viable future to alleviate a number of the issues that we have with data centers on Earth. Cooling clearly being the biggest one, because with cooling you have energy, and clearly that's not a good thing. So this is not, clearly it's abundant in space. So this is not a challenge just in low Earth orbit, where these we're already seeing beginning to emerge towards the end of this decade. We're starting to see this even as potential viability out in geo. So it's an aggressive shift towards how far can we push data center coverage. And you can see 8% share of the global data market by 2040. The costs are plummeting, so the data is already starting to exist. If you were to ship at the moment, not by FedEx, but maybe, or UPS or Amazon, a 42U a DC single unit server, usually it weighs around 2,000 kilograms. And currently that costs around $2.7 million per 1,000 kilograms. If you were to ship that thing up on a Falcon 9 rocket, that's going to drop to around 200,000 by the time Starship gets going here very, very shortly. The ultimate goal by 2040 is around $20 per kilogram. So you can see massive scale in reduction, opening up channels to that space. And NTT Data have already started to work very heavily on high capacity, long distance optical transmissions. They already have an experiment. They used a 12 coupled core fiber cable in a terrestrial environment, and it was incredibly successful at providing application movement for high volume data. So I think I'm making a relatively strong point, I hope, for why every single person on the call, no matter your job or no matter your industry, needs to become proficient in understanding the implications of the change in compute structure from one form to another factor. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about communications, which is the second part of the puzzle when we're getting into this. So let's jump over and talk about advanced communication systems. Okay, so again, put up a lot of information on the screen. I'm kind of go through this. Again, it's all intertwined. So I guess you can read what's in the slide here. Again, I'll probably spend about 6-7 minutes on this topic. But let's begin, because I think the most important thing, if we're thinking about advanced communication systems to the vast majority of people on the Zoom today, is going to be 6G and its evolution. And you're thinking, well, gosh, haven't we only just got through 5G? And yeah, I mean, we have, and it's pretty advanced. We're starting to reach full capacity of its technological or technical capabilities. Essentially, we've squeezed as much as we sort of can out of it. We're seeing improvements, but they're marginal at this point. So whilst 5G was predominantly focused on speed and latency, and it was great, right? It has helped us integrate emerging technologies like AI and edge computing and some advanced sensing. 6G takes that additional step. 6G expands those even further. And it's not just by speed and efficiency. I mean, yes, it's aiming to hit terabyte level data speeds, near zero latency, or as close to zero as you can possibly get. Of course, the physics folks on the call will say, well, that's just not possible. But that's why I say as close as it can get to zero latency. And that unlocks a whole bunch of different things. It's immersive experiences like extended reality, holographic communications, real-time AI processing becomes possible on a massive scale. So it's not just about making your phone faster so you can stream Netflix even better or download. I'm sure you've probably already got enough patience to wait a few seconds for something to download at this point. It's more about a network infrastructure that can handle super hyper connected societies and extremely complicated machine-to-machine interactions in a way that 5G simply cannot. So we maybe should spend a few moments on some of those applications and implications. I think one of them is that you're going to be seeing in the next few years, by the way, with 6G, we're looking towards the end of this decade, but you're going to start to see a planning curve that is necessary. So remember, we know the future is going to happen, and we know approximately when it's going to happen. The question is, do you wait for it to happen, or are you building a planning curve in your product development pathways? Because that's a competitive advantage. And one of those is going to come around hyperconnectivity and edge AI, where 6G, because of its very low latency, because of its massive bandwidth capability, is going to drive AI services real time at the edge. That's everything from fully automated drone fleets, real-time language translators, all synergistically working. They're going to work because you're going to be leveraging then a distributed AI platform. 6G networks will essentially work as decentralized AI nodes. They're continuously learning from each other. Think of that as a large-scale neural network that could be placed over cities, supply chains, potentially even countries or regions that have their own domains. A true competitive advantage at every layer in the supply chain and geopolitical landscape. They'll also be significantly more contextually aware, driving context-aware services significantly. Traffic systems, retail, healthcare, all of them driving context-aware services because they are going to real-time adapt to your individual context and surroundings. So think, for the last 20 years, we've been talking about personalization, and we've seen improvements, right? We're even waiting for that real breakthrough moment, This is that breakthrough moment, that on-demand experiences. Hyper-intelligent machines, precision healthcare, remote surgeries, digital twins, all of these things are going to be significantly shifted because of intelligent, highly decentralized, hyper-speed 6G. Okay, hopefully that excites everybody about the opportunity, and it's a very strong, near-term, should be in your planning issue to be watching. Okay, let's talk a little bit about interplanetary internet, just because at the moment I love space. I think it's probably one of the least understood, most important areas to be focusing on, and interplanetary internet is part of the communication systems that we need to talk about. And really, when we think about interplanetary internet, which sounds super fancy, but I'll break it into something more realistic for you. We're talking really about fault tolerance, delay tolerant networks that are capable of linking humans, robots, and systems across planets, moons, and even deeper space. So for that, we can go into maybe geo to think deeper space. It's not really deep space, but I mean, it's pretty deep when we think about our current based applications. It's not theoretical. There is a losing my words. There is a coalition, I meant to say, of space agencies already involved in this. Private companies, research institutions that are heavily invested in this already. And there's a few different approaches. I'm going to quickly go through those three. The first one is Lunar Gateway Communication Systems. That was NASA's Artemis program. It's a pretty long-term project designed to create a lunar gateway, essentially a space station that is orbiting the moon, and it supposedly is there for a communications hub for lunar exploration and then future Mars missions that we're going to see. We've seen some progress, but it's been a little bit challenging, unfortunately, for Artemis. It's starting to technically speaking, growing in terms of its laser-based optical communication systems, but the bandwidth will be around 100 times higher than traditional radio frequency systems. So there's success in theory. The challenge has been Artemis 2 was delayed. Artemis 1 was completed in 2022, December 2022. Artemis 2 was due to launch late last year and has now been delayed until April 2026. I think it was a minor issue like a heat shield problem that has delayed it. So, hey, I guess that's a good reason to delay a mission moving up. But this is a challenge, because another example would be China's Messias satellite. So this is a space race, make no mistake, it's an overused term, been used for decades, but absolutely make no mistake, this is very real in terms of competitive advantage at every level that will be impacting us. So Messias is kind of interesting. The Chinese back in 2017 demonstrated a quantum key distribution long distance channel. Fairly impressive. Since then, they've been developing quantum microsatellites. So these are compact microsatellites. They weigh about 20 kilograms. And I mean, that's almost a threefold reduction in previous quantum satellites. And ultimately, what it's there to do is to provide space to ground quantum key distribution. And they were able to do that. And that would be with portable ground stations. So Messias portable ground stations. And I believe in the last test, we know that it was around 0.59 million bits of secure keys in a single satellite pass. This is important. Security at every level of everything that you do, the products that you do, the data that you're sharing, your customer's data. It doesn't matter who the customer is. It's very, very important stuff. So I raise this as an issue for you to be more aware of. Quick backup, Starlink is there. Vision for the future is very clear. It's a pathway channel for moon to Earth communications, and more permanent interplanetary infrastructure is on its way being built. So the US does have a reasonable advantage in this space and are continuing to exert some of that advantage in the space. Okay, so let's take over to the next. So we do have an interesting offer for anybody that's here. And if you're qualified, and I believe there's going to be some more information on this, our team operates through engagement. We love engagement. We love being challenged. We love to share our learnings. And we've designed these engagements to do that, similar to what we're doing today, but probably a little bit deeper and a little bit more focused. You can see 4 options here, from transformational forces of the future to a one on beyond Gen AI, what comes next, to one on sustainable technologies. There's also one on bring your challenge, and just with an emphasis on needs to be something that obviously we have knowledge in. So if you're qualified in this area, please let us know, and we'll be very happy to provide a complimentary session. It's a lot of fun when our team get to interact with our customers, so we'd certainly look forward to doing so. Okay, so third up, and I'm going to move fairly quickly through this one, because the first 2 were critical in understanding the remaining, is the energy hungry world. Now, there's lots of elements to discuss here, and we could pick probably a good 30, 40 subjects at least. But we've settled on hydrogen, SSBs, which is solid state batteries, and SMRs, which are small modular nuclear reactors. And hydrogen we've selected because we believe that hydrogen, especially the role of hydrogen fuel cells, will be very critical for you to understand as part of the energy mix. This is not only for sustainability, but it's important if you're building products that require any form of energy power source. So clearly hydrogen, when it's powered by green hydrogen, so that's produced via electrolysis using renewable energy, hopefully, it emits only water vapor. So obviously that is very strong for eliminating CO2 emissions that are associated with things, especially large-based diesel generators, where essentially the primary problem are. I think a typical diesel generator generates around 2.7 kilograms of CO2 per liter of fuel that is consumed. So they are extremely hungry when it comes to traditional fossil fuel sources. Replacing them with hydrogen fuel, for example, in a data center, reduces the carbon footprint by as much as 90%. So we're starting to see a dramatic drive towards new technologies for power sourcing. The Hydrogen Council, not so long ago, I think it was last year, said that if you deployed hydrogen systems in the communication space alone, you would save up to 500,000 metric tons of CO2 annually for a mid-sized network operator. That would be by around 2030. So there are similar savings, for whether you're in pharmaceuticals or automotive or other industries. How are they doing this? Well, through a number of different ways. There's things like proton exchange membrane fuel cells, which are doing this, very useful for trucks, cars, buses, very high power density, very quick to start up, and you're seeing advancements in things like platinum group metal catalysts, which are essentially reducing the catalyst loading to lower costs and maintaining the fuel cell performance. So significant savings can be made across the board. Environmentally are obviously there. I think green hydrogen production scale and cost decreases are happening. We're starting to see that 1 to 2 kilograms, $1 to $2, per kilogram. I think that was the IEA that had that number. That number, I think, is by 2030. And hydrogen backup systems are going to start to become the norm within many of the environments that we see. Solid state batteries are fascinating, which is why we've decided to bring them up. Clearly, there's lots of discussion around lithium, and then you've seen obviously lithium ion and then lithium ion phosphate and an evolution in lithium in order for it to stay relevant as far as part of the power mix. And indeed it will. It's going to continue to be the case, but solid state batteries, I think, are bringing new opportunities to the market in a way that we haven't seen, and are starting now to gain real, true commercial traction. SSBs, as they're more commonly known, are really focused on energy storage density, super high energy storage density. It's about 2 to 3 times the energy density of current lithium-ion batteries. So that better storage capacity that you garner from that is extremely valuable. And also, they happen to be on a smaller footprint. So that's important for large-scale renewable energy storage systems. For example, things like solar farms or wind farms, which are still prevalent around. It improves the lifespan of batteries. That means longer life cycles. That means better replacement costs, and obviously reducing environmental waste. So there is an awful lot there for grid scale applications and even microgrid scale applications. We see them driving significant cost reduction. By 2030, we expect to see a decrease by about 50% compared to lithium-ion batteries. So that makes them extremely competitive, which is why you're seeing this $6 to $8 billion number in here. So there are challenges abound. Some of the material availability is still a bit of a challenge within this space. There's some other issues like interfacial resistance and stability there. There's some issues with dendrite formations, which are like these needle-like structures that can penetrate the solid electrolyte that's in the structure. So that's not good. It causes short circuits. So there are challenges ahead. But what we know to be true is that major players like Factorial, which is a company that Mercedes recently started working with, Samsung, SDI, QuantumScape, all expect a commercially viable, mass-produced version within the next 3 years. You've seen Honda entering the race very recently. I think that was in December. And it's developing its own SSBs. And they are targeted by the end of this decade, so clearly before 2030, to have its own mix. Finally, SMRs, small modular reactors, are low carbon energy generation naturally. They're very flexible in how they're to be deployed. They are unlike, obviously, large-scale nuclear plants. They can be installed in remote or off-grid places. They lower cost, lower construction time, ideal for industrial operators, ideal for data centers, ideal for cities to become grid independent. And yes, there are regulatory approvals. Yes, there's public perception issues. But ultimately, the energy conundrum that we found ourselves in will ultimately make us turn to advanced nuclear technology. And SMR deployment, we expect, usually takes around 3 to 5 years versus well over a decade for traditional nuclear plants. So it stands for very good reasons, not least the technical issues which are being solved, for these to become very predominant throughout business and government. Okay, so I've been moving breakneck. We have one more area to be covering. This one won't take too long, but I find it extremely fascinating. So hopefully you will too, because we all can benefit from health. And certainly we can benefit from some of the things that I'm going to be mentioning here. If I bow my head, you'll see bald patches. So you'll see why I'm very interested in this thing. I'm very excited. This area of health is unbelievable what is happening. Many of it driven by some of the things that we've talked about in section 1 and section 2. But we should not mitigate the role that scientists are making within healthcare. The longevity industry is the one that I find truly fascinating. So I love this work that my team brings to me, and I get to be excited to talk about it. And you do too, if you can speak to the team directly. This is not just about anti-aging creams or better fitness apps. Yes, they're doing their part in this $600 billion market, and it's a tremendous change. But really what we're seeing is cutting-edge science in AI genomics, AI-driven drug discovery, even cellular rejuvenation technologies. It's rewriting. When I thought about this, and like, how would I describe it? It is rewriting the playbook for how we age, and more importantly, how we do not age. As I've said, I just hope it isn't too late for me, but I don't think it is. Based upon what we're seeing here, I think it's truly going to hit every single person that's on the phone today. So let's start with some of the advancements that are perhaps more internal. I already alluded a little bit earlier to nanotechnology, and it is on the rise. Been here for a while, but it's already delivering precision treatments at the cellular level. Nanoparticles targeting very specific tissues to repair damage, to regenerate organs, to deliver anti-aging therapies where they're needed the most. I mentioned an example earlier. I'll let you know that was from 7 years ago. We were working at 7 years ago, and it's coming to market extremely soon. For me at least, and I think our team, hopefully speaking for my team here, one of the most significant ones is epigenetics. And this one works by, this will blow your mind if you're not familiar with this. Epigenetics works by modifying these switches that control gene expression. Essentially, they reset cells to a younger state through things like DNA methylation, histone modification, chromosome remodeling. These are all mechanisms that are being used and being harnessed. It's truly fascinating about how it expresses interest. Scientists are also experimenting with partial cellular reprogramming. So for that are in this space, that's the Yamaka factors, guys. And for that, we're looking at reversing the biological clock without erasing the cell's identity, which clearly wouldn't be a very good idea. My favorite way of picturing this, when I try to describe this to folks, is it's kind of like rebooting a computer. But instead of losing your data, the computer regains its peak performance. We're seeing studies on this already. It's already showing incredible promise in reversing biological age. It's just beginning, but what we know to be true is that it's just beginning with existing compute hardware. I'll talk in a moment about Castrovi and the work that's being done there. But if you place these quantum machines, of course, but even if you place some of these very advanced RL-based AI engines to this content, to these challenges, you see significant opportunities. I mentioned Castrovi. So that's actually an FDA-approved therapeutics for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. It was a CRISPR-Cas9 project, so it's using CRISPR as you would expect, and this therapy edits the blood forming stem cells, and it produces fetal hemoglobin, and clearly provides essentially an antidote mechanism to sickle cell disease. It's truly incredible. We're going to finish now with advanced cultured food, which scares the living out of me. It's been a whirlwind, guys. Thank you for being so patient. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. And again, hopefully there's been a few things here. Here's a reality. Lab-grown food will account for about 30% of the world's protein supply by 2040, which is startling. Driven by a couple of forces, sustainability and scalability. If you think about sustainability, lab-grown meat and protein offer a potential solution to the impact that we have on traditional farming. Compared to livestock farming, cultivated meat requires much less water and energy and produces about 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So clearly there's an advantage there. Desertification is obviously a very serious issue. United Nations, I think, put out a number that 100 million hectares of fertile land are degraded each year, particularly in important areas like Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So this is an unquestionable issue that we need to see sustainable agricultural production. But it doesn't sound very appetizing, does it, lab grown? So how does it work? Maybe this will make you want to crave it, although I strongly doubt it. It is produced through cellular agriculture. That essentially means that we isolate animal cells and grow them in a controlled environment using a bioreactor. So the bioreactor, if you want to think about it, is more like a field of the future. It gives you the ideal conditions to multiply and mature into muscle tissue. Ultimately, the growth factors, the amino acids, scaffolds are then combined to mimic the texture and taste of a conventional meat that you would normally consume. So it eliminates the need for traditional meat sources, and hopefully it's still the same. Doesn't that sound yummy? Scalability is the next one. It's fairly prohibitive, but we're starting to see very strong growth. Like the OG of this space is Meatly. They're probably, look at me sounding all young and cool with the OG references. That's what young children get for you. But they're producing lab-grown chicken at near parity with conventional prices. In the UK, became the first European region to approve it. Okay, so I think at this time, I think we should do a very quick poll while I take a quick breath here. Here's a poll for everybody to answer. We'll talk through some of these ones. So what do you see as the biggest barriers to adopting forward-looking technologies, much like we've been talking today? You know, what do you think is at the heart of this issue? Like, you know, there's a few of them here, and there's probably some other things that you might throw in here, but I'm seeing, well, immediately skill gap got off to a huge, and it seems to be holding its lead. This is like an interesting derby race of the horses. Regulations, resistance to change, lack of funding, difficulty integrating. Yeah, it seems to be leveling out here. So I think I somewhat agree. I think skills gap and workforce readiness are definitely a part of it. If I was voting, and so by the way, nobody's wrong, right? Everybody is right, so everyone gets a trophy. If I was to say, I would say that resistance to change is probably one of the biggest issues that we deal with when we go into organizations, and it's a behavioral issue. It's just the way that we approach problems. The technologies are usually there. Finding them is difficult, but they're usually there. To find, and that's why we're so busy with the work that we do. But it's really getting organizations to shift, because you get used to a certain way of your monetization of your business. Your business model gets affected, and that's where we see a huge issue. So thanks for this. Thanks for filling that out. I think super interesting results. Okay, I want to take a few questions, so let me finalize here. Just a couple of slides left. This is real quick. And it's just to say that, look, the resistance to change has to come through intention. I talked about it earlier, and intention usually comes with that phase one. It's the most important component to do. If you don't do this bit right, then nothing else works. If you don't get the right information coming in, you can't possibly expect to respond and act in the correct way unless you get extremely lucky. So you've got to have a mechanism, folks, and we have to put our hands on our hearts. It's not R&D's responsibility. They're a component of it. In fact, they're in the last component. They're in the R&D stage. They'll work on things that ultimately are directed toward the business. It's really having a pulse. It's that sound mixing board. How are you doing that? How are you acting? How are you taking this information from today? Are you dismissing it? Are you going to take it back to your teams and talk about it? Are you going to set some intentional time to absorb it? You might not love my presentation style, but is the information good? We create behaviors that create behavior that unfortunately leads to negative responses. So I always urge people, think about that first one. Really important. Okay, so my final parting thoughts, and then we can get some questions in. Technology's role is unbelievably important. It doesn't matter what you're doing, folks. If you're in finance, you need to understand quantum. If you're in supply chain, you need to be understanding, obviously, raw materials, but you need to be understanding the convergence of all these issues and the myriad of challenges. Shifts scare people. They scare everybody. So you have to mitigate it by attacking it. You have to immerse yourself in things like this, intentional efforts. Transparency and breadcrumbs are going to be the currency of the future. It doesn't matter how good your AI is. If you can't trust the AI, they're not going to use it. You can't trust it to be passing information to your scientists that are developing new drug formulations to hopefully have stronger efficacy for certain disease types if they don't trust the digital twin that's developing it. So whether you're doing it operationally internally or whether you're using it as an externally facing solution, you have to build trust as a unique and innate part of the build structure. Stories resonate. We're humans. We love them. And so, yeah, we can be focused on technology. But the reason why you can't get your executives on board is not because they hate technology. It's because they just don't understand how it plays into the overall space. So get really good at storytelling. Get really good at writing. Get really good at explaining things without the use of PowerPoint, which I'm doing today. And make topics like sustainable tangible for people so they can really get it in their heart, not just their heads. And then finally, it's not new innovation, but you got to realize it's getting harder, right? So let's frame innovation correctly. There's different levels of innovation. It's a term that's been overused. Let's start to give it meaning. Let's give it intention. Let's give it structure. Let's understand what's most important versus least important in our organization, and then align all of these twitching of the different knobs on the studio board to that. And if you do that, my prayer for you all is that you will get closer to making a better and more confident decision. That's all she wrote for today, folks. So we may have some questions. I've got Bernie coming up. Before I bring Bernie on board, I do want to have a quick nod to a cool event that we're doing. It's called Engage. It's in the UK, this one. We will also have one in the US in September in Dallas. These are fantastic. We did our first last year. It's a superb event. Really great audience, lots of high engagement, lots of provocations. You're going to get a lot out of it if you spare the time to attend. But Bernie, let's bring you up, Mr. Bernard. Bernard is one of my team. Do we have any questions, Bernie?
Hi, Richard. Yes, thank you very much for the session. We certainly have had a few questions come in. So let me put one across. And I think this pertains a little bit more to the recent, the last section that you had. Do you believe that society is ready for the moral challenges that undoubtedly come with these types of developments?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, and it depends who you are. So society is very broad. I would say governmentally, we're ill prepared. The United States is ill prepared. The UK is ill prepared. The way that we've introduced some of these newer technologies, especially the earlier ones, have been more from a different perspective than perhaps some of the traditional quote unquote adversaries, to use more of a militaristic term. So the ones that we typically call bad actors, the Russias, the Chinas, the Irans of this world, which everyone has opinions. They approach these very differently. So their use and approach of these technologies is through a totally different lens to how we approach these technologies. So we've approached it more from a commercialization perspective. Their approach has been different, maybe more disruption perspective first, how they can be used. So maybe, Bernie, I think we've got to do a lot more in schools. I think education is probably the biggest pitfall that we have. We haven't integrated this into our systems of learning. And I think sooner rather than later, we have to introduce these into systems of learning in order for them to have the roll-on effect into our work environments, which will, have a knock-on effect.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. I'm going to go through a couple of others and also just spread it along some of the different topic areas. So in relation to generative AI, how fast is adoption happening and where are the efficiencies impacting roles?
Well, adoption's relative to population low, relative to population, which would be a total addressable market for it, for business purposes, for example, it's pretty high. I would say, I don't know the exact number, but I would imagine at least 40 to 50% are active users. There's a bunch of passive users. So adoption is relative to more specificity on the question, and the question I'm happy to take it off board. But let me talk specifically about applications. I think this is the biggest issue. People are sort of rolling it out, slapping an LLM on top of knowledge, and then expecting it to work some magic, and that's just naive. We have to give it specific intent. So when you give an AI a specific role, specific function, it does a great job. When you don't, you won't. So the early stage stuff we're seeing are things like reducing formulation times for drug discovery. So we're definitely starting to see that. Digital twin production for supply chains. We're seeing phenomenal amount of real tangible evidence of cost savings in that space. So, you're seeing these things, Bernie, you're seeing some softer area stuff like, sales communications and developing email templates, writing skills and things like that. Those are not hard economic productivity forces. So manufacturing environment or optimization, we're starting to see a lot happening there in reducing timeframes. And anything with large scale, data crunching, there's a significant saving there. Yeah, but there's real results. You just got to give it intent.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another one here, Richard. Can you give your view, or could you elaborate a bit more on the quantum sensing aspect of quantum tech versus the more well-known quantum computing and quantum comms?
Sure.
Also quantum sensing for health, materials, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the reality is that quantum sensing has been around a very, very long time. Quantum magnetometers, for example, are already being and have been explored for a long time. Quantum magnetometers are, highly acutely sensitive, aware quantum chains that ultimately are in a circular fashion. So we've reconstituted the atoms, and we're able to put them into a variety of different lattices or frameworks in order for them to be responsive to certain inputs. So quantum magnetometers are fantastic. They've been used for submersibles. So, for example, we can sense whether a submarine that is cloaked is there, and the quantum magnetometer can sense far more acutely than any other forms of propulsions that we're currently able to do today. And you've seen it already, Bernie, you've got different types of atom clocks for quantum sensing, quantum dot-based sensing. So really, this is just a reconstitution of traditional forms which have been using, again, in GPS for a very, very long time, and just recreating them into different structures so they can sense different things. There's even ones that are able to now sense if they're placed in the atmosphere. Actually, Missius is starting to do this, so you can sense any cloaked ships underneath, any cloaked aircraft, for example. Through air disturbance, right? So it's a different mechanism for doing it. Fascinating space. I know we're pretty much out of time.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much out of time. Maybe there's one that you could that came through. How close do you think we are currently to build a full-blown AGI? Any thoughts on that?
Very, very close. I don't think it's any more than a few years out. And again, defined as I said earlier, proto-AGI. Proto-AGI meaning compute power, not emotional power. Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Richard.